Welcome to a special episode of the Gaming News Canada show. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. As we hit the record button on this Wednesday morning, September 18th, there's breaking news of the big league sort from the Canadian sport business and media industry. Scott Soshnick and Badenhausen of Sportico, the US-based business and sport publication, first broke the news that Rogers Communication will acquire Bell's 37.5% stake in Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment for $4.7 billion in Canuck bucks. Rogers already owned 37.5% of the North American sports and entertainment behemoth, while Larry Tanenbaum holds the remaining 25%. For those of you keeping score at home, MLSE is the parent company of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Raptors, the Toronto Argonauts, Toronto FC, and the Toronto Marlies. And in case you forgot, Rogers are also the owners of your Toronto Blue Jays. Under the terms of the deal, which require the approval of the various sports leagues, TSN will continue to broadcast Leafs, Raptors, TFC, and Argo games. Bell Media has also secured the content rights for both the Leafs and Raptors on TSN for the next 20 years through an agreement with Rogers that is also subject to league approvals. For more on the biggest story we've seen in Canadian sports for some time, we welcome back to the show the co-founder of Parlay Media Group, Mark Silver, and also friend of Gaming News Canada, Jonah Siegel, the man who almost always leads the way in scoopage on the Canadian sports media scene. Jonah joins us from the town of the Giants, 49ers, and the home of Rice-A-Roni, San Francisco. Hey, Jonah, thanks so much for hopping on early this morning.
Happy to be here. I thought you were going to say the man who is always on the road when breaking news happens. I think you guys always call me, and I'm somewhere other than Seattle, which is my home as of right now. I think the last we did this once when I was in the Bahamas, I believe.
Oh, you were like in a conference room, and actually, Steve, I'm in Chicago, so it is a American contribution to the pod today.
Hey, Jonah, it reminds me of Dave. You and Dave Naylor are a little bit alike. Dave Naylor, a TSN's football beat writer. When we were at the Globe Mail together, we jokingly referred to the Naylor rule, and it seemed that every time Naylor was on vacation or on an airplane, there was major news happening. So that gives you something in common with Mr. Naylor. Hey, Jonah, let's start with you, and I want to get Mark's thoughts on this too. And this announcement this morning that was broken by the guys at Sportico, it certainly has created some buzz on the internet. But we had more than an inkling that something like this was coming down the pike, right?
Yeah, I would say that there's two stories that I think we've all been anticipating that are massive. Were going to be massive stories for the industry. One was this one, the ownership settling of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And then the second is the NHL rights deal in Canada. Those are the two. And they're absolutely connected at the joint. What happens with one would lead to the other. And I think that's where we're at now. I think that's abundantly clear as to what's going to happen in the next phase. I mean, the one question, guys, that isn't addressed in any press release or article, and Mark, you may be more insightful than anyone on this, is the absence of requiring regulator approval on this deal at all. There's no mention of requiring government approval. I don't know if that's just omitted. I don't know if it's not needed, but in this country, in the US, something of this size, given the players involved in the media rights, I would think there would be some sort of oversight, insight, some type of somebody looking at a deal of this size, but it's not mentioned there.
Well, it is, Jonah, it is kind of mentioned in the press release that Rogers put out, does speak to the rights that TSN will have access to at a fair market value. And Steve, you mentioned a period of 20 years. That is a great long period of time. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that TSN will buy said rights at fair market value.
Correct.
So it's kind of what's left unsaid is what it piques my curiosity more than anything else.
So this was unusual bedfellows when they entered a partnership. By all accounts, it's been every bit unusual since they've been partners. And inevitable divorce has always been looming over the business. So the fact that we've arrived here today is not surprising. There were tons of rumors out there that Larry Tanenbaum was going to try and and somehow take over. That's certainly, and buy one of them out to take ultimate control. That certainly seems a lot less likely this morning. What happens with his stake? Now it's anybody's guess. From my perspective, the fact that they allude to 20 years as an option, but it's not negotiated, that's interesting. There's a whole lot of questions here that have not been answered, I think. The press release mentions external investors. Love to know who they are. Like who's Edward Jr. who's he gonna do a deal with? You guys know better than me, but is it private individuals? Is it bankers? Is it pension funds? Like who's he gonna get to pony up the money? Because he mentions very clearly that this isn't going to affect the debt load of Rogers. And I know for a fact, that they are desperately trying to take these sports entities off the books at Rogers and make that a private business. So that's coming somewhere as well. And then the last piece is what I mentioned is what happens when the NHL rights deal is up at the end of next NHL season, not this one, but the end of next season. And how does that parlay, like using that word with you, quote, how does that parlay into Gary's back pocket? I think that, with Amazon about to start, I think this just gets curiouser and curiouser as we go along. But I'll let you ask your next question.
Hey, Mark, I do want to get your take on the investors piece that Jonah raised. But first of all, just your thoughts on the media rights issue, because obviously that's a very big piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah, as a former Bell shareholder during my time working at Bell Media, I think announcing today that TSN would be locked out of Leafs and Raptors might not be the right thing to do unless there's another sports play that Bell is thinking about in order to bolster that side of the business and have the customer funnel and access to an amazing top audiences in the country. I think when we talk about the ownership, and again, I don't have any more information than you all do, but it seems like if the Rogers or RCI debt load isn't impacted, then what about the family? The family holding these assets outside of the corporation. Again, these are the kind of pieces of information that I'm sure will come to light in time, and which is great. I mean, for all of us, we're sports fans. We just want access to the teams that we love and grew up with, and now, as far as that press release is concerned, it'll be a balance of Sportsnet and TSN, for quite a long time, at least until the NHL rights go down. And what happens with Amazon, remains to be seen. But given Amazon's complete dominance in sport, as of last week, every major sporting event is accessible to anyone who has a Prime membership. Now, they do have to pay a subscription fee to the likes of TSN and Sportsnet and DAZN and Fubo to access that content. But very quickly, when you think about the cable businesses or satellite businesses or fiber businesses of Bell and Rogers as it relates to the distribution of said broadcasters, that's kind of going away. Amazon is taking over. And we already know that the SVOD business, if you're following the larger TV market, the SVOD business is basically disappearing as distribution through the likes of a BDU. So, these are the pieces of the puzzle that have already been placed on the board. It's more so now what is going to happen next. And that NHL rights deal, if we had to look at one moment, and I guess we're looking at a timeline of about 12 months when that will be determined, that NHL rights deal is already redrawing the broadcast media industry in Canada. This is but another step. And I have a couple other thoughts on this, but I want to leave it out there for a moment, Steve, for you and Jonah on those few thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jonah, the three of us, we kind of have, I guess, more than tap dance around the whole rights deal and what the landscape's going to look like in this forum over the last couple of years. But I think just because there's so much out there, I'd just like to ask you, when this rights deal, NHL rights deals expires, what can Canadian sports fans expect to see moving forward? Like, how are we gonna watch Leaf games, and what's Hockey Night in Canada going to look like, and where's it going to be distributed? Like, what are going to be the options if you're someone who loves watching NHL hockey?
Well, Ken Campbell had a pretty good article in the Hockey News. If you remember the Hockey News, it's still actually a printed piece of media. I think that, listen, the world has shifted past tense, right? The way we consume content is continually changing. So I think long gone are the days where the vast majority of people are sitting around a television watching through a cable box. It was revolutionary when we went from rabbit ears to cable. Now it's going to shift again from cable to streaming. So I think that change is here. As Mark was just alluding to, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Apple, whether it's Netflix or whomever, our watching habits have changed dramatically. And it's been apparent for a long time that there's just not a ton of players who are going to circle around to grab at the Canadian rights deal for the NHL. Like we've learned the hard way, and I don't think it's surprising to many that the NHL is just not the NFL. Joe and Jane Public do not sit around and watch, with all due respect, Columbus playing Nashville on a Thursday night, in Barrie, in Calgary, in Saskatchewan, right? They'll watch their local game 7 nights a week, but they're not watching a random game. That just does not happen. And that affects ratings, which affects ad dollars, which affects all aspects of the deal. So how Gary's going to find somebody to make up that money, he's got the right partners now. Amazon's an investor in the league. They own one of the teams essentially. I was going to say here. I'm not here. I'm in San Francisco, but they best essentially own the Seattle Kraken. One of their CEO certainly does. That's where we're headed. So who in Canada was going to participate? By all accounts, Bell had no interest in the deal anyway. So you're left with Rogers. We'll see what's left. That's on the straight cable side. There's not many people left to buy it. So there's going to be a digital owner, I believe, and there'll be a straight cable owner. And where does CBC end up? Probably out in the cold again. That would be my bet.
Hey, Mark, there's, almost everybody has said that the NHL is not going to get another $5 billion deal. Given everything Jonah just mentioned, is there a path forward to the league getting that kind of revenue in the next media deal for Canada?
I think there is. I'm optimistic that with the likes of Amazon at the table and the value of that audience and the demographic of that audience and the savings of that audience, we're talking about maybe a generation of Canadians that all of us, the three of us, grew up in, maybe a little different from the way Canada looks today, but that is a lucrative audience of people with deep pockets. And that's definitely an audience that Amazon wants shopping in their stores. And so I think the NHL is going to get their number. I don't think that's a question. My biggest question is, over the air, does that matter? Is there City TV? We already know that doesn't have the distribution of CBC, or of course CTV. Are those viable options in this new deal? Who's to say? Right now, that remains to be seen. Chorus and the Global Network is a vast network. I believe it's at least third after CTV in terms of distribution. That company, at least by what we see in the stock market, is hanging on by a thin thread. There, of course, are some protections of ownership over Chorus, but there is the history there. Chorus and Shaw, Rogers now on Shaw. I mean, the tentacles and the connective tissue, if you will, are in place to do something there. That definitely would require regulatory support to go through. So I'm definitely watching with interest. I think there's some other storylines here, Steve, if you can allow me to take over your show for a moment. And I think it dates back to 2010. It dates back to 2013. When Bell wholly acquired Bell Media, which effectively was in 2010. There was all about mobile access to content and games. It was all came out of that halo of the Olympics that we were all a part of. And I think we know today that mobile is not the place where this content is consumed, at least in long form. In short form, absolutely, thanks to the social platforms. But in long form, that has become, with the rise of technology and connected TVs, obviously Amazon is leading that with content today on a sports basis, the 10-foot experience is back. We had a moment in time when it was about mobile, but not anymore because that's dominated by short form and the social platforms. And of course, we know the leagues, I'd say NBA above all others has really embraced that platform to be able to drive a young audience to their players and to their brands. But when you wind the clock back to that initial purchase, and then you look at the movement of Keith Pelly from CTV, after the acquisition over to Rogers to be president. And then you look at the deal, which didn't happen initially when Nadir Mohammed was CEO of Rogers Communications, where they didn't have the ability to wholly acquire MLSE. And then we ended up with the deal that just got changed now. And in the meantime, we wind the clock back just a few months ago, Keith Pelly returns, working with Edward Rogers. Then he brings in Phil King. Phil, definitely one of the masterminds behind the rise of TSN into the business that it has become. And now you have Phil, and you have Keith, and Edward, who seemingly lets Keith do whatever he likes, which is a very common theme with Keith. And now all of a sudden you have Sportsnet, who has their leader back. The likes of Rob Corte, Greg Sanso. I mean, Keith was there before. Now Keith is back. What's going to happen there? Is there an opportunity? Jonas, since you're in the States, I'm going to let you kind of take this one to the next level. But do we have a Yes Network? Is this Monumental Sports type? Is this Nessun? Is this MSG? Like, you have an opportunity here with MLSE owning the teams, owning the biggest sports channel in terms of audience in the country. Do they really lay their claim to Toronto and they become the Toronto Sports Network? I get it. They just renewed long-term NHL deals in the West. I love that. That's a great strategy to get access for the telco part of the business. But really, like, what is going to happen with Toronto? Because we all know that the rest of the country, like, it's not even a fraction of the size of the Toronto market as it relates to media. But Jonah, maybe give us some of your U.S. influence on my line of thinking.
Yeah, I'm going to say two things, Mark and Steve. First, there's two people I would never bet against. One is Gary Bettman, and the second is Mark Zuckerberg. So Gary's going to hit his number. There's no question. I don't know how, but he'll hit that number, and he'll probably exceed it. He's only lost once since he's been commissioner for X number of years, and that's in Arizona, and that story's not over yet, right? So I'm not betting against him. Look, here's the most fascinating thing about the deal. Junior is not a sports fan, right? Like, he is not rah Maple Leaf, rah Blue Jay.
Oh, I've seen him in his Maple Leaf jackets at the game with his sons. I mean, he's there.
But he's not. He is not the biggest sports fan. I'm not saying he doesn't like it, but he's not that guy. But he gets everything that you're just talking about. He understands this is a business transaction for him. He understands the value that owning all of it does to the business, and what that he's seen what it can do for one entity, and owning them all, what that does. And I think that's the bigger play. And I think you're 100% right, Mark. I think that controlling the content and the branding for his entity, I assume he's going to privatize it, as he's talked about, so it comes off the public books. So we all don't know exactly what's going on there. But controlling content for those properties under one house is invaluable. Like, we live on our devices now. We consume content all over the places, whether it's podcasts, whether it's social media, whatever it is. He's now going to own all of it in the biggest properties. And as you all know, you looked at the hockey, just look at Stanley Cup playoff ratings. The Leaf ratings in their series were through the roof, way higher than anything else in Canada the rest of the way, including the Oilers, as they marched much longer through the playoffs. That's all you need to know, right? So if he controls the content for the biggest properties in Canada by owning those franchises, he owns people's attention. As much as the rest of the country hates Toronto, there you go. The rest of the country hates the Yankees. The rest of the country hates the Red Sox. Guess what?
Well, I think the rest of the country already hates Toronto, so they can't hate Toronto anymore.
It doesn't change the truth. So, what's most fascinating to me is you have a guy who is not what I would call a traditional sports nut owning the team. He's not Jerry Jones, and he's made, I think what's really, and I put this on Twitter this morning, undoubtedly he has put his money where his mouth is, right? He has given the Blue Jays a ton of capital. He spent a ton down in Dunedin. He spent a ton on the Dome, and he's given Shapiro and Atkins oodles of cash and payroll. more than anyone has ever asked for. So you can't complain about that. The question is on accountability on the winning side of the team. Shapiro's still there and he's got nothing to prove for it. How Shapiro came in, how Beeston went and Anthopoulos left, certainly questionable, right? His love or disdain for Masai Ujiri, clearly unusual, to say the least. What Masai's done since that contract, maybe he's smarter than all of us, who knows? But as a fan in the Toronto market, I think it's reasons to give you some heart palpitations. So what does that mean? That to me is the question, because Shapiro and Atkins are still there and they've been left to do what they want to do without a whole lot of accountability, with zero to show for their efforts. That to me is a big question.
Hey, Mark, that I want you to weigh in on that, but I was going to mention Bruce Arthur from the Toronto Star tweeted this morning that this is a very bad day for Toronto sports, this announcement, and obviously Bruce is looking at what's gone with the Blue Jays. To Jonah's point, I guess when I looked at this announcement this morning, I thought, okay, well, having one less owner makes it less messy. But to what Jonah just said and Bruce said, do you agree that this is a bad day for Toronto sports?
The way I look at this deal, especially let's see what happens with Larry Tanenbaum's interest in the team once that plays out. But let's assume that is going to play out before the start of the next NHL rights deal, if not sooner. And then all of a sudden you have Keith Pelly, very proud Canadian, who's running MLSE. Mark Shapiro becomes disposable, expendable at that point in time. And Keith is just getting started. Whatever version of the Leafs and Raptors that we're going to see in a few weeks, they're just rolling it back, as we all know. But let's see what really happens when things get serious. Because when I talk about going back to this marriage was consummated between Tanenbaum, Bell, and Rogers, I mean, that changed a plan that perhaps was already in play with Edward and Keith of what they were going to do with all of these assets that they control. So it's been 10 years. That plan might have been put on ice. So they're going to dust it off. It's a new landscape now. And I think if you have someone who plays to win, and I got the opportunity to work under Keith back around the 2010 Olympics, and Keith plays to win. He's not a paycheck player. And so, because he has nothing to prove in business. He won the Argos a championship back in the day. He likes to celebrate. Let's give Keith a chance. Let's be patient. Let's have him make the moves if he has to make moves in leadership of his three major franchises in Toronto. Let's look at the track record of, if we could shift a bit, Steve, let's look at the track record of Rogers and Bell, kind of in the media business, and their affiliations. I mean, the Vancouver and London Olympics combined was a success like never before and like never again when they got together around the consortium. Financially, maybe not, but Raptors winning a championship is definitely something to highlight, the last 10 years of ownership. But when you look at that ownership and you think just for a second, 12 point whatever billion dollars this entertainment and real estate company is worth, that is unbelievable. And I don't remember the exact number. Was it $25 million is initially what Larry Tanenbaum put into the ownership of the Leafs 25 plus years ago, and now it's worth in excess of $3 billion. That is truly unbelievable. And so let's stop for a second and celebrate the business success. And in the field of play, which I guess is what Bruce is talking about, let's just give it time to breathe. We're not winning any championships today. So again, look at success in the first partnership around Olympics, success in the partnership around MLSE, business success. I mean, there's another piece out there. Rogers and Bell are very much in business around the production and the mobile truck business that produces all of these games. Not a well-known household name company overall, but a little company called Dome Productions, and they are 50-50 owners of that business. Let's see what happens there. Is that on the table next? If Bell is looking for cash to make their shareholders happy to reinvest in their telco business, that is just another source of cash. And it sounds good to the shareholders.
Hey,
let me just
go ahead, John. Yeah.
So I hear you. To 99% of the population, what you just said is mildly entertaining and interesting. All people care about is, do you win? And, you know, the number 1967 comes up a lot. And you said something very interesting in that soliloquy, and that is, we're not winning any championships. And that seems to be the mantra. And it's opening day of Maple Leaf training camp, and you're saying already we're not winning any championships. And that's the problem. And I'm not making the argument, but that's where people's heads at, right? Is that Brendan Shanahan and company have been there X number of years, nothing to show for it. Shapiro's been there for X number of years, nothing to show for it. Masai did have a championship, and look, good on the man. But since he struck his last deal, certainly not good, right? And I'm a firm believer that these guys want to win. Just like you said, there is nothing that pads a pocket or a pocketbook more than winning. You get playoff games, that is pure profit. So these guys, like, they want to make money, win. Winning is the best source of making money. But for whatever reason, that seems very elusive for these franchises. And no matter how much money their shareholders are making or their owners are making, they're in the results business because they're in the public sports business, which is a public trust. And they're failing, and they've failed. So the stuff that you're talking about is mildly interesting to idiots like the three of us, and a small percentage of the population that watches and interests what we do. But at the end of the day, they're in the results business in sports. And either they produce or they don't. And thus far, they haven't. And that's respectfully what they should be judged on, not what they're doing on Bay Street. And I hear you. And you're right. The guy's been on the job as president for 5 minutes. He should be given the opportunity to fix this. Having said that, he inherits the record of the franchises that he's with. And right now, that isn't good. And that's what people are looking at. Right or wrong, fair, not fair.
We know now that he's likely been distracted by this since before he even started the job. So not dealing with Masai, Shanahan, Shapiro. Well, as fans, yes, it's infuriating. Definitely didn't understand how Shanahan gets to roll it back one more year. Incredibly frustrating. Did stop me from buying my little pack of Leaf tickets? No, it didn't stop me. But it stops me from going. My kids go.
Right.
Because it infuriates me. But that's us,
Yeah.
Let's give him a chance. I mean, that's all I can say on this format. Like,
we have no choice.
I believe in him, and
we have no choice anyways.
Is he going to turn out to be? I'm talking about Keith more than Edward. Is he going to turn out to be the likes of Dolan, in New York, and be that cutthroat? I mean, I hope so, because at some point we need to stop being polite.
Hey guys, just real quickly on that, and listening to the two of you, and also Bruce Garriock of the Ottawa Citizen / Sun had a lengthy interview with Michael Andlauer, the new owner of the Ottawa Senators, and his articles in today's paper and on the website. I'll make sure I include a link to it in the Substack post when this podcast goes out. And just in terms of the face of the franchise, or in this case, the face of the franchise, is like how relevant or important is that, Jonah? Does it have to be Ed Rogers? Does it have to be Keith Pelly? Does it have to be nobody? Like, how relevant is that? Because again, it's like it or not, that's a topic that gets knocked around a lot.
Well, I have to run in a second, but I was going to leave you with this thought, and it's apropos to that. The face of sports is fundamentally changing in North America very, very quickly by virtue of the dollars being thrown around. So the NFL has, for the first time, allowed private equity ownership into their club. When you start throwing around 3.5, 4, 5, 6 billion, and the rumor out there is that the NBA is going to expand to Vegas and Seattle, and it's going to be north of 4.5, 5 billion US bucks to get into that club. The folks who can afford that, right, are looking for a 2x to 3x return in 5-10 years. So when they sell, who's buying that? It isn't individuals, and if it is, it's not individuals that reside in North America. So the Jerry Jones, the days of the Steinbrenners, of the Mark Cubans who sold are gone. Like, they're over. And to me, that's a tragedy. And this isn't an old guy trying to hold on for dear life, but there is something enduring about an individual owning a sports franchise. And as much as we may have hated Harold Ballard, there is something about a character being behind the franchise. And I like it. That identity, that personality. Does that mean it has to be there forever? No, of course not. But the NFL, which is the greatest show on earth, the greatest business on earth, a license to print money, allowing private equity into the club, that tells me everything you need to know where this is headed. Big business just got a lot bigger. And no, Edward Rogers Jr. does not need to be the face. He's got a PR department. He's got a GM. He's got a president. With social media and COVID, Steve, you're the media guy. There is no more face, right? The days of guys like you going into the locker room to talk to people is way over. These guys control. Mitch Marner this morning on the podium said, I'm not talking about my contract. 15, 20 years, guys like you would have said, yeah, I heard you about that contract. That doesn't happen anymore. So to me, it's sad. It's lost. I wish that it didn't, but the numbers are taking us to a place where individuals can no longer be that face. That's my response.
Hey, Jonah, just before you run, I really appreciate your time. Just on Larry, and Larry, he shows no signs of slowing down. I believe he was just reelected chair of the board of governors for the NBA. He set up his own sports company to launch a WNBA franchise in Toronto. Where do you think? What's next for Larry?
So that's the third wheel that I wouldn't bet against, right? Like, until today, lots of people were angling that he was going to somehow end up on top of this. There was a great article, I think, by Michael Grange and Bruce Arthur, I think it was the two of them, where there was a quote from someone saying, don't bet against him. If anyone needs to go raise money to do this, it would be him. By all accounts, he's active. Doing what? No idea, but I wouldn't bet against him. So to me, I don't know. There was a report that he was doing something in soccer, European soccer. I saw that on Sportsnet. He's got the WNBA. I would not bet against. I do not think he's going quietly into the retirement night. How about that? And while this certainly seems like an entry into an exit of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, I do not see him leaving the Toronto sports world anytime soon.
Hey, you can find Jonah Siegel on X at YYZ Sports Media, and Jonah's got a little mini scoop this morning on the Amazon NHL TV deal. So look at that. I'm sure Jonah will continue to weigh in on today's announcement. Mark, we're going to get you to hold for a few minutes because I got a couple more questions for you. Jonah, thanks so much for joining us from San Francisco, and we'll get you back on again real soon.
Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
You too.
Yeah, be good, Jonah.
Hey, Mark, I'd love to get your answer on the face, the need to have that face. And you and I, we both known Keith for at least a quarter of a century, and that's the spotlight. He's quite comfortable with that. And I just wonder, is it quite plausible that Keith kind of becomes the face of this new look MLSE?
Yeah, I don't think for a second it's not Keith. I think Keith is definitely the right person. Everybody loves Keith. His track record, you can't touch it. I mean, what he has done in his career, from Olympics to professional sports to reinventing the NHL deal in Canada, to what he did on the European Golf Tour. We know a little bit how that's playing out. So that made a lot of sense for him to make a decision to come home and return to someone who, again, I don't know all the details of their relationship, but it seems like Edward and Keith have been very fond of each other for some time, and now they are reunited, and Keith will have a chance with some fresh faces around him at MLSE, because he inherits some excellent people on the business and operations and venue and technology side at MLSE. So he's already got an all-star team. So really what he has to do is be a politician, work the media, who he knows. He knows everybody. And so I look forward to that. I do hope he makes and the board makes some difficult choices around the leadership of the actual clubs, how necessary perhaps some of the current leaders are, given the new landscape of Keith being the CEO. So we won't go into Michael Freesdale and Richard Petty kind of before him and what kind of CEOs they were. But Keith's a media guy. He's a TV producer. He's a sports fan. He lives and breathes this. And I think with that kind of character and charisma, the people that need to believe in Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment will believe. But like Jonah said, and there's really no way to debate it, the proof will be hoisting championships. If they're not hosting a championship, in particular, obviously for the Stanley Cup, then that will ultimately be the deciding factor on whether this was the right deal for Rogers, was a good move for Canadians. So more to come on that, but I'm patient, and I'm willing to give Keith a while to see how this plays out.
Hey, Mark, last question, and we spoke earlier about the press release from Rogers saying that they're looking to bring some investors on board, and because we're a sports betting show usually, and we're kind of going off the grid a little bit for this episode, but having a lot of fun doing it, I do wonder if there is an opportunity for an operator in the gambling world to get on board an investor. We know that FanDuel's invested very heavily in their partnership with TSN and Bell Media, and FanDuel's also a corporate partner of MLSE. And this is probably oversimplifying it a little bit, but going back to the conversation you, Jonah, and I had about sports fans being rabid, I would think there would be a lot of people who would love to write a check to be involved with a sports behemoth like MLSE.
Yeah, we know that many companies want to be involved with MLSE. When we look at the landscape of TSN, Sportsnet, MLSE, and the nature of the gaming operator partnerships that they've done, including land-based with the likes of Fallsview, for example, what we see is that, and we'd only heard, it didn't come to fruition, we heard that there was potentially quite a broad deal available for one operator to basically lock up all three. Now, again, for the sake of the audience, when I say lock up, I don't mean like commercial time. Commercial time will be available with certain windowing and adjacency, just to speak in the technical terms. But really, this is about like integration, sponsoring shows and getting deep into content, which is something we've seen on the TSN side go very well for FanDuel and TSN. We've seen some of that on the Sportsnet side, but both Sportsnet and MLSE decided to not go exclusive. They determined to get more money out of that category, they would go non-exclusive. And at this point, it would be hard to suggest which operator would actually be exclusive, if that makes any sense. I think we're still early days, you're the expert, Steve, but we're still early days in the gaming category. What we do know is that there's only one province of Ontario, which is currently an open market. We believe Alberta is coming next. And so this distinction between the ability to market in Ontario, the ability to take your marketing and go national, and it differs between the two types of operators in our market who are legally operating. There's the ones who are obviously operating legally in Ontario, and then some of them, and your audience knows this very well, some of them operate in what's known as the gray market outside of Ontario. So access to national broadcasts allow those operators to circumvent the limitations that they would otherwise have on marketing locally in the other provinces. But until the rest of the country opens up, how much patience do some of these big global operators have to wait for the rest of the country to open up? And so I think when you look at Rogers, now that they will have control of MLSE, there is so much greater ability to cross-sell and integrate across the two assets to make sure those rink boards that are available when they're not being replaced by the virtual rink boards, to make sure those rink boards or those ice logos line up to a media buy on Sportsnet. These are the kind of synergies that you can create when you own both assets.
Yeah, and we've also seen a shift too, Mark, and advertising spend is down by the operators. We knew there was a flurry of it when the market opened in April 2022. Those dollars are shifting now. As you mentioned, it's still a very young industry. There's a bill in the Senate right now to establish a framework around sports betting advertising. So this is a very new industry still, and that'll be one of the issues that we'll keep tabs on. Hey, let's wrap it up here. I know, Mark, you and I, this is a passion play for us. It's kind of fun to go back into the sports media and sports business side of the industry. So thanks to you for hopping on at short notice this morning. Thanks to Jonas Siegel again for being with us. We'll wrap up this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find this podcast at gamingnewscanada.ca and on the various podcast platforms. We will look forward to seeing everybody again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.